I remember the exact moment I thought my life had finally settled. The divorce papers had been signed, the house was quiet again, and the ache that once lived in my chest had softened into something manageable. I wasn't happy, but I was free. Free from waiting for messages that never came. Free from replaying arguments at 3 a.m. Free from asking myself where everything went wrong. I had rebuilt my routine, my confidence, even my future. Then, on a night that felt like any other, my phone vibrated. One notification. One name I hadn't seen in over a year. My ex-wife. For a long second I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding like it used to. I almost didn't open it. I told myself whatever she had to say didn't matter anymore. I had moved on, so I thought. The message was short. No apologies. No explanations. It's just a request to talk because there was something I needed to know. Something she should have told me before we ended everything. In that moment, the past came rushing back with a force I wasn't prepared for. Every memory, every doubt, every unanswered question resurfaced at once. I realized then that healing doesn't mean the story is over. It just means you stopped asking why. This isn't a story about getting back together. It's about what happens when the truth arrives too late, when closure comes after you've already learned to live without it. Because sometimes moving on doesn't protect you from the past. It only makes the truth hit harder when it finally knocks. Life after the divorce didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly, almost politely, as if it didn't want to remind me of what it replaced. The first weeks were the hardest, not because of loud pain, but because of the silence. The house felt unfamiliar, even though every wall had heard our voices before. Mornings were the worst. I'd wake up and reach for my phone out of habit, half expecting a message that would never come. Over time, I learned to stop checking. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the disappointment had become predictable. And predictable pain is easier to manage than hope. I rebuilt my life in small, careful steps. I changed my routine, not dramatically, but just enough to feel like I was moving forward. I started waking up earlier, going for long walks before work, letting the cold air clear my head. I rearranged the furniture, not because it mattered, but because I needed proof that things could look different and still function. Friends would ask how I was doing, and I'd say better because it was technically true. I wasn't breaking down anymore. I wasn't replaying every argument in my head. I wasn't asking myself what I could have done differently, at least not out loud. There were moments when peace felt real, not happiness, not joy, but peace. The kind that comes when you finally accept that something ended, and no amount of thinking will bring it back. I stopped telling our story to people. I stopped defending myself. I stopped explaining why it didn't work. I told myself that closure didn't require answers, just acceptance. And for a while, that belief held. I even let myself imagine a future that didn't include her. It felt strange at first, like walking into a room you were never meant to enter. But slowly, the idea became less terrifying. I focused on my work, threw myself into projects I had neglected, and felt a sense of control return. I laughed again, real laughter, not the forced kind meant to reassure others. I met new people, had conversations that didn't circle back to the past. There were nights when I came home tired instead of lonely, and that felt like progress. Still, there were reminders. A song we used to love would play in a cafe, and I'd feel that familiar tightening in my chest. A couple arguing softly in a grocery store aisle would make me think of us how we once sounded just like that, believing our love was stronger than the cracks forming beneath it. But even those moments became manageable. I learned how to let them pass without attaching meaning to them. I told myself that memory doesn't equal desire, and missing someone doesn't mean you belong with them. The hardest part was convincing myself that the unanswered questions no longer mattered. Why did she pull away when I tried to fix things? Why did she seem so certain it was over while I was still fighting? Why did the end feel so sudden when the problems had been building for years? I tucked those questions away like old letters still there but unopened. I believed that some truths were better left undiscovered, that reopening old wounds only delayed healing. By the time a year passed, I genuinely thought I had reached the other side. The pain had dulled, the anger had faded, and the longing had transformed into something distant and quiet. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping. I had let go, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to breathe again. I had built a version of my life that stood on its own, without explanations, without apologies, without her. That's why the moment felt so cruel when it came, because just when I believed the past had finally loosened its grip, just when I trusted that letting go meant freedom, something was already on its way back to me, something I didn't know I had been protecting myself from. And in that calm I had worked so hard to create, I had no idea how fragile it still was. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind you don't remember for anything special until something ruins it forever. I was sitting on the couch, half watching a show I couldn't even name now, my phone face down on the table like it had been for months. I didn't live with it in my hand anymore. I didn't jump at every vibration. That chapter of my life was supposed to be over. Then the screen lit up. At first I didn't recognize the name. Or maybe I did, and my mind refused to accept it. My heart reacted before my brain could catch up one sharp, familiar jolt that sent a wave of heat through my chest. I stared at the phone without touching it, as if it might disappear if I waited long enough. It had been over a year since the divorce. No messages, no calls, no accidental likes on old photos. Nothing. We had become strangers on purpose, yet there her name was glowing softly in the dark. I told myself not to open it. I even laughed quietly, trying to break the tension. What could she possibly want now? An apology? Closure? To reopen something we both agreed was finished? I had survived the worst part already, and rebuilt myself piece by piece. Whatever she had to say couldn't change that. At least that's what I told myself as I finally picked up the phone. The message was painfully simple. No greeting, no small talk. Just a single line asking if we could talk, because there was something important I needed to know. Something she should have told me before. That was it. It's no explanation, no context. Just enough to crack open every door I had spent a year carefully closing. I felt anger first, a sharp, defensive kind. How dare she do this now? How dare she reach out after all this time when she had walked away without looking back? I typed a response and deleted it, typed another and erased that too. Each version sounded weaker than the last. I didn't want her to know that one message had undone so much work. I didn't want her to know that my calm was fragile, that my certainty had cracks. I set the phone down again and stood up, pacing the room like I used to during our worst arguments. The memories came back, uninvited, her voice when she was trying not to cry. The way she looked at me during our final conversation. Already somewhere else, while I was still begging for clarity. I had asked for honesty then. I had asked her to tell me if there was something I didn't know. She said there wasn't. She said we had simply grown apart. She was telling me that wasn't the whole truth. Part of me wanted to ignore her completely, to protect the life I had rebuilt by refusing to reopen the past. But another part, quieter and far more dangerous, needed to know. That part whispered that unanswered questions never really disappear. They just wait. And here they were, knocking again, louder than ever. I finally replied with a short, careful message. I didn't ask what she wanted to say. I didn't offer forgiveness or warmth. I just agreed to talk. The moment I hit send, a sense of dread settled in. It felt like stepping onto thin ice, knowing it might hold, but also knowing it could break beneath you without warning. We agreed to meet in person, not at either of our homes, somewhere neutral, public, safe, the kind of place you choose when you don't trust your own emotions. As the day approached, I found myself replaying our entire relationship in my head, searching for signs I might have missed. Moments that didn't make sense then, but might now. I wondered if the truth would explain everything or destroy the peace I had fought so hard to protect. By the time the meeting came, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just afraid of what she was going to tell me. I was afraid that whatever the truth was, I wouldn't be able to unknow it. That even if I walked away again, this time the past wouldn't stay quiet. It would follow me, reshaping every memory I thought I had already survived. When I saw her again, the first thing that struck me was how different she looked, and how familiar that difference felt. It wasn't about age or style. It was in her posture, the way she carried herself like someone who had been holding something heavy for far too long. We exchanged a polite hello, the kind strangers use, and sat across from each other with a table between us that felt wider than it really was. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded. She finally looked up at me and said my name the way she used to when she was about to say something difficult. That was when I knew this wasn't going to be simple. She didn't start with the truth. She started with hesitation, with apologies that sounded rehearsed but still fragile. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. Said she understood if I hated her for reopening old wounds. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me that the divorce hadn't happened for the reasons I thought it had. As she spoke, the version of our past I had learned to live with began to unravel. She told me that during the last year of our marriage, she had been carrying a secret that felt impossible to share. Not an affair, not a loss of love. Something quieter, heavier. Something she believed would destroy me if I knew. She said she thought she was protecting me by staying silent, by choosing distance instead of honesty. And every time I had asked her what was wrong, every time I had begged her to tell me the truth, she had looked me in the eyes and chosen the lie that felt safer. The truth came out in pieces, like she was afraid that saying it all at once would make it real. There had been pressure from people close to her. There had been circumstances beyond our control that she thought I would never accept. Decisions made without me, not because she didn't love me, but because she believed she knew what was best for both of us. As she spoke, moments from our marriage suddenly shifted into focus, the night she pulled away. The arguments that never seemed to have a clear cause, the way she cried after fights even when she had one. I felt anger rise, sharp and uncontrollable. Not just at her, but at the past itself. At the version of me who blamed himself for things he couldn't have fixed. At the nights I lay awake, wondering why I wasn't enough, why love hadn't been enough. I realized that the pain I carried after the divorce wasn't just grief, it was confusion. Confusion left unanswered becomes self-doubt. She told me that when the divorce was finalized, she felt relief mixed with devastation. Relief because the secret was finally buried. Devastation because burying it meant losing me forever. She thought time would make it easier, that I would move on and never need the truth. But time didn't do what she expected. Instead, it made the guilt louder. Every milestone I reached without her reminded her of the lie she had built our ending on. Listening to her, I felt two conflicting truths collide inside me. One part of me wanted to stand up and walk away, furious that she had taken away my right to choose. Furious that she had decided my limits for me. Another part of me saw the fear in her eyes and understood something painful. She hadn't left because she didn't love me. She left because she was terrified of what honesty would cost. When she finally stopped talking, there was a long pause. The noise of the cafe faded into the background. I realized that the story I had told myself for a year, the story where I was abandoned, where love simply faded, was incomplete. It's not wrong, but incomplete. That made it harder to carry, not easier. I walked away from that meeting knowing that the past I had made peace with was no longer the same. The memories hadn't changed, but their meaning had. Once meaning changes, you can't go back to ignorance. The truth hadn't given me closure. It had given me clarity, and clarity, I was learning, can be just as painful as loss. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her words replayed in my head on a loop, each sentence heavier than the last. I kept thinking about how Lee, one truth, revealed too late, could bend an entire life out of shape. The choice she had made back then, the choice to stay silent, had already been lived. It couldn't be undone, but now a new choice sat in front of me, and this one belonged to me alone. I had to decide what the truth meant now, not a year ago, not back when love was still bruised and raw, but in the life I had built since then. I thought about the version of myself who survived the divorce, who learned how to wake up without her, who finally stopped checking his phone for messages that would never come. I had moved on, not because the pain disappeared, but because I learned how to carry it. Letting her back into my life even emotionally risked reopening wounds I had only just learned to live with. At the same time, I couldn't deny what the truth had changed. It stripped away the self-blame I had worn like a second skin. It gave an explanation to the silence, to the distance, to the ending that never made sense. Forgiveness suddenly felt possible, but forgiveness didn't automatically mean reconciliation. And that difference mattered more than I ever realized. When we spoke again, I was honest in a way I hadn't been before. I told her that the truth mattered, but so did timing. That love doesn't just survive on intention, it survives on trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't snap back into place just because the reason feels understandable. She listened without interrupting, without defending herself. Maybe that was growth, or maybe it was acceptance. Walking away from her that second time felt different from the first. There was no anger in it, no confusion, just a quiet finality. I understood that some choices shape your life not by what they give you, but by what they permanently remove. Her choice had ended our marriage. My choice would decide whether it ended my healing too. But in the end, I chose not to go back. Not because I didn't take care, but because I finally cared enough about myself to protect the future I had fought to build. Some truths come too late to fix the past, but just in time to save what comes next. Sometimes, closure doesn't come in the form of reunion or forgiveness wrapped in a happy ending. Sometimes it comes as clarity, quiet, painful, and necessary. After she walked back into my life with the truth, I realized something that took me years to understand: moving on isn't about forgetting the past. And it isn't about pretending the love never mattered. It's about choosing not to let yesterday keep deciding who you become tomorrow. Her return gave me answers, but it also gave me a mirror. I saw the person I used to be lost, blaming himself, waiting for explanations that never came. And then I saw the person I had become. Someone who survived heartbreak, who rebuilt in silence, who learned that peace is worth more than closure that comes too late. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it finally put it in its place. We don't always get the ending we imagine. Some people re-enter our lives not to stay, but to teach us one last lesson. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't holding on, it's letting go one final time, without anger, without hope, and without regret. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a truth that arrived too late, or a choice that forced you to protect your own heart, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you believe emotional, real-life stories like this deserve to be told, support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. Some stories don't just entertain us, they remind us how to heal.